Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us this evening to learn more about Washington's moths and what you can do to help them. My name is Jess Ostfeld, and I am the statewide outreach coordinator for WDFW, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I am joined by our presenters, habitat biologist Christie Caldwell, assistant invertebrate species lead and biologist Melinda Vickers, and habitat at Home Coordinator Claire Kerwin. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. Closed captioning is enabled. If you prefer to have it off, click the button with the 2 C's in the lower right corner of your screen, then select Hide Subtitles. The chat is open for general interactions, but if you have questions for the presenter, please use the Q&A feature. We will answer as many questions as we can, time permitting, at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and we'll send out a link to the recording in a few days, along with any links that are referenced. We will also put links in the chat throughout the presentation as they are mentioned. Now, I am very excited to invite WDFW habitat biologist Christie Caldwell to kick things off with an introduction to Washington moths and how to identify them. Christie, I am going to hand over control to you.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Jess. All right, let's see if I can get control here. Oop. There we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, so how we're going to do this is we're going to start by doing an introduction to moths, kind of talk about how to observe them, and then some common moths of Washington State, and kind of how to identify them. Then Melinda's going to talk about moth species of greatest conservation need and kind of what the agency is doing for that. And Claire Kerwin is going to talk about how to support and build habitat for moths. Sorry, a little slow on my end here. Not really sure why that is. Come on now. Okay. All right. So to start off, we kind of want to know, all right, it's probably good to know what a moth is. So what makes a moth? When we're saying moths, what are we talking about? So when we're talking about moths, we're talking about insects in the order Lepidoptera. And Lepidoptera consist of moths and the kind of subset that are butterflies. So basically, butterflies are kind of fancy moths. They are their own separate thing. They've been classified a little bit differently, but they all have their different families that are butterflies, and then some are moths. Most of them are moths, actually. Butterflies are kind of in the minority. So when we're talking about moths, the antennae are feathery. Generally, they're straight. They don't have any clubs at the end or hooks, which is what you would see if you were looking at a butterfly. And moths are primarily night flying. So that's generally when you're going to see them. And we do have some day flying moths too, but generally you'll see them at night. And that's why I have here that there are always exceptions. So we have, for example, the western sheep moth that some of you may have seen kind of in some more open areas. Those are really brightly colored. You can see those during the day. They won't come to your light if you're looking for moths. And then there are also some species of moths that have kind of almost club-like antennae, so it thickens a little bit at the end, like sphinx moths. So with moths, the larval stage is a caterpillar, and they undergo complete metamorphosis. So what that means is that they start as an egg, so they'll lay some eggs, usually many more than this, or they'll kind of spread them around or in clumps. Then they'll hatch into a caterpillar. They'll go through a few molts as they get bigger, because as we know, they kind of can't grow with that outer skin. They've got to shed it. And then once they reach their final molt or instar, they will become a pupa. So they'll start making, some of them will make a cocoon, and then they'll pupate into that. So some cocoons are made out of just silk. Some are a mix of silk, and you can see here it's kind of fuzzy. That's from their little hairs that they take out to use that to protect themselves. And then after a little bit, they will emerge as a moth. So that is your kind of general moth introduction of what they are and kind of how they work. So we know what a moth is. Why should we care about moths? Like, yeah, they're fun and stuff, but who cares really, you know? Well, there are a few reasons, and one is that they're excellent pollinators. There's more and more research coming out on how great they are as pollinators. Sometimes they're comparable to bees, which is crazy because we always think of bees as the best pollinators. So they do a lot of work there, a lot of species do. And that's kind of part of what we'll be talking about at our event on Saturday, which is at the Bellevue Botanical Garden, where there are lots and lots of flowers. So they're also food for other native wildlife like birds. So caterpillars are a great source of protein for them. A lot of frogs like caterpillars. All kinds of things eat caterpillars, and they they provide that nourishment for them. And also moths as adults, they will provide food for things like bats. So all of our species of bats are insectivores. So they will all go after moths, and that's a pretty big part of most of their diets. And they're also fun to observe and enjoy. So that's kind of my favorite thing with moths. And I think a lot of people can look at them and find something interesting. And my hope is that after this presentation, you'll have something to kind of look at and go, okay, that was kind of interesting about them. Maybe I kind of want to look into that. All right, so we're going to start and talk about how to observe moths. So we know what they are, we know why they're important. So how can we kind of find them? How can we look at them? So to start with, caterpillars are a great way to observe moths. They're a lot of people's first exposure to moths. So in my case, I did start as a kid looking at those woolly bears, little caterpillars. Here's a banded woolly bear. You see them all the time, probably around. They're kind of around the state, and there are lots of different species that are similar. And they're often seen on walkabout. So you'll see them kind of running around on sidewalks and things like that, going real fast and places you wouldn't usually find them. So maybe not on leaves and things where they're looking for a spot to overwinter. So they're looking for a nice warm place to be safe for the cold season. And just a little note, be careful when you're looking at caterpillars or, maybe touching them. Some of them have what's called urticating hairs, and that's a big word that just means that they have kind of hollow, irritating hairs that have a barb in the center, and they can inject venom. So that can be a little irritating. And, not all of them have it, but it's always good to check and make sure, see what other folks are saying about that before you touch anything. And then beating sheets on host plants. This is not something you want to do to your neighbor's garden without asking. But a beating sheet is something that you can use that is a sheet with kind of a frame, and then you've got a stick, and you can place that framed sheet underneath a branch. And you can go to kind of the base of the branch and kind of hit it a few times. So it doesn't hurt the plant or anything. It's not getting rid of any branches or anything like that, but it can shake loose the things that are feeding on those leaves. So you can kind of see what's in your garden or what's going on and who you might have. So moths as adults, there are a lot of really good ways to observe these guys, and the best way is going to be to bring them to you. So moth sheeting is a really effective way to observe moths. You see there's a kind of a crude sheet here just hanging from my sliding door. And then you put a light in front of it, and they'll come to the light, they'll be attracted to that light, and they'll rest on the sheet. So that's a really good way to just take a peek and see what you've got as far as moths in your area. You don't need a mercury vapor light, but it is preferable for a lot of folks because it has a lot of wavelengths, and moths see more than we do. So it will attract more moths than just a regular light. And the same goes for black lights. So they've just got different wavelengths, a different range of color that they can see. And that's a really good thing to put up, and you can put them up at the same time as your mercury vapor too. But even just a light in front of a sheet is great. And if you leave it on while it's dark a little bit, come out and take a peek at what's there. All right, so for moths of Washington State, I'm going to go through in sort of a an unconventional way that I think makes the most sense. And I think this is going to help you identify moths a lot better. So I'm going to go through some of the common families of moths. So don't get too caught up on the names of the families. They're those big scientific names, but they all have kind of common descriptions. So common names, you'll see what I mean by that, but it really helps. And you can kind of look at different characteristics for those moths, and you can use those to see maybe what you have and narrow it down a bit. And that really helps. So for moths in general, we have likely over 1,000 species in the state. That's crazy. That's so many moths. And I mean, how many of them do we have around us that we just don't see because we're not really looking? The macro moths versus micro moths, I do want to bring this up real quick because this is something that comes up when you're talking about moths pretty often. Basically, when we say macro moths, we just mean big moths versus micro moths, small moths. That's all it means. It's not actually any kind of, there's no scientific difference. It's just big versus small moths. I'm going to focus on the macro moths because I think that that is what's going to be the most helpful. So the families have different characteristics to kind of classify them, like I was saying, and we'll go through some of those. And it's interesting because some of them are within families are specialists and some are generalists. And what that means is some of these species will feed on like one plant, some will feed on a bunch. So it's kind of interesting to look and see what you've got and where they are and where they can be. So that can help with that as well. And then we also have there are many more families of moths than the ones I'm going to talk about, but we'll cover the common large ones so that you can kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. All right? Okay, so we'll start with my favorite, which are the erebids or erebids if you prefer. Erebids are the underwing tiger and tussock moths. So here we have a lovely tiger moth. We've got a few of them here. All these four are tiger moths. They usually have bright colors and patterns, so you can kind of see why they're called tiger moths. And we also have like the tussock moth. So this is a Douglas fir tussock moth. You'll see why it's called the tussock moth in a minute here. And we also have the underwings. So this one is much bigger than it looks in the picture. This is much bigger than these other species here. But I'll show you a picture and I'll show you what I mean when I say underwing here. So many of these species of erebid are really, really fuzzy as caterpillars. Some of them have those urticating, kind of irritating hairs. Some of them don't. It just kind of depends. I'm sure some of you have picked up like the banded woolly bear that's in the picture a little bit earlier as kids. Those, those are a pretty common species that we have around here throughout Washington State. And then research also shows that some species jam bat sonar to avoid predation, which is really, really cool. So bats make those clicks and the moths are able to kind of block it and send it back, which is really, really interesting. Okay, so when I say underwings, kind of looks like sort of a normal moth. You see a little peak of color here. But then when they open their wings, when they're disturbed, you can see those underwings are really bright and they have a really, really dramatic pattern. And that's to kind of shock a predator. So one thing David Droppers, a really incredible moth expert, has said about moths is if you're wondering kind of why they have a certain feature, you can kind of just, of course, if you know what it is, you can kind of just give it a light poke and just see what it does. Give this guy a light poke and it's just going to open its wings up and say, hey, I'm going to shock you. I'm going to surprise you. And yep, frozen. Okay. Oh, all right. So this one is one of the tussock moths. So you can see you've probably seen these guys around. These mostly hurt a little bit. They irritate. So I wouldn't be touching any of these guys, but they are very, very cute. All right, so next are the geometers. So these are the inchworms. Geo means the earth and meter comes from measure. So to measure the earth makes sense, inchworm. And when they're moths, they mostly have this kind of flat, broad wing shape with a little tiny body. So this peppered moth has kind of one of the bigger bodies of these geometers, but mostly it's pretty small compared to the others. So you can see that they have different wing shapes, but they are mostly flat. And you can also see that they have hind wings that follow the pattern of the forewings. It's actually kind of hard to tell sometimes where the forewings end and the hind wings start. So you can see on this emerald right here, this is the end of the forewing, and this line here goes right into the hind wing. So that's a pretty good tell of a geometer moth. So you can kind of see that pattern follows into the hind wing. And there you go, a little inchworm. Everyone's seen some kind of inchworm, I'm sure. Very cute, also called loopers, because they make that loop in the middle when they bring their legs together. You can also see that they have this adaptation where they're missing a few legs here. And usually there would be more with other caterpillars, but because these make those looping motions, they don't need them. All right, so next up is the lasiocampids. These are the tent caterpillars or the lappet moths. So these two are tent caterpillars. This is a lappet moth, very cute. I always remember it by the word camp in there. When you're camping, you're going to make a tent caterpillars. So the fun part of this is, like I said, with all of the exceptions, not all make tents. So you've got this Western tent caterpillar, which you probably see quite often in the summertime. They have big boom bust cycles. This guy makes a lot of tents, so you'll see those on deciduous trees. But this one is a forest tent caterpillar. And this one doesn't make tents, but it does make little flat silk sheets, and they are gregarious, so they're kind of all together, but it's not quite the same. So these ones don't technically make tents, these ones do. And that's just one of those weird exceptions with some of the families, but they are generally referred to as the tent caterpillars. They also have a really stocky build. They have a big fuzzy body. I think they look like stuffed animals. I think they look the most like stuffed animals out of all the moths because they have little kind of smallish wings and really big fuzzy bodies. You can also see the males have these big thick antennae here. So right here is the Western tent caterpillar you can see, and this one is that forest tent caterpillar. So going back, Western, forest, top and bottom, there you go. Okay, so then we've got the noctuids, the owlet moths. This is a huge family. Most of them have thread-like antennae, and you can kind of see that in this guy here and down here. Most moths are going to hold their antennae kind of under their wings alongside their bodies. But whenever they're kind of out and they're still flying around or they've just landed, sometimes you can see them up there and it makes it easy. And generally, their wings are going to be held in a triangle above their bodies. So you can see that really well in some of these. And they have a kidney-shaped wing spot. So that's a really easy way to tell if something's a noctuid. So all these species look really, really different, but they all you can kind of see that kidney-shaped spot, and they do have a marking above it too that's rounder. So you see that kidney spot there, round marking up here. Not all of these ones are native. There are a lot of non-native noctuids here. They're kind of considered pest species, a lot of them, because they're the armyworms or cutworms. So they come in kind of big groups, and they're known for sort of being in agricultural areas and sort of taking over those plants. So you'll find these guys as caterpillars closer to the ground and kind of in the dirt. So here's an example of one of those caterpillars. A lot of the time, like I said, they're kind of close to the ground and in the dirt, so they'll be kind of more brownish or greenish, sort of simple earthy colors. And sometimes they have some dark markings up here, kind of dark triangular markings. Can't really see it much on this one, but there are a lot of species that have it. It ends up being kind of a rectangle along the body. And the notodontids, these ones are fun. So the prominent moths, we've got a lot of weird, funky shapes here. So several species of these guys look like twigs as adults. So you can see in the sigmoid prominent, it kind of looks like a twig to me. It's got that weird shape and kind of darker end where it looks like it's just a little broken off. And they tend to have furled wings at rest, and that's another good example of it. They kind of are a little closer than the other ones. The antennae tend to narrow towards the end, so they'll start kind of thick and then they narrow down there. You can really see it on like this morning glory prominent, I think it is. Super, super narrow here and then really thick up here. So they have a very unique look to them. And even though they're pretty different, those characteristics can kind of help in IDing them. And what you can't really see in these pictures is that this guy has a huge mohawk. It looks very silly and kind of adorable, but they have a lot of really interesting shapes that break up their form. So that's another super unique thing about the notodontids. And there's a caterpillar. That is of the white dotted prominent, the one that's the kind of yellowy gold one I was just showing you here. That's the caterpillar of that guy, enjoying a big leaf maple. But typically these caterpillars are pretty simple looking, don't have much hair on them. Okay, the Saturniids. So these are the giant silk moths. They are really, really big, so they're aptly named giant silk moths. They don't feed at all in the adult stage. And I always think they kind of look like bats when they're flying around a light. So you'll kind of glance over and you'll see this huge thing that's flying around, and it just looks like a bat. It's pretty impressive, and it's pretty cool to see something that big over here. They're really charismatic. They've got eye spots on their wings, so you can see them right here. Another thing to kind of shock is one of the main thoughts on why these are here. And they have big furry bodies. So we do have we have this guy here, and we also have a few other species. And one of those is that western sheep moth that I had mentioned. That's a day flyer, but we don't have that many Saturniids, but we do have a few of them, and they have that really thick antenna for both sexes. So it's not super easy to tell what's a male or a female. Generally, males and moths have thicker, featherier antenna than the females to pick up her pheromones, so they can kind of fly to her. But these guys have a little bit more on the females too. And that's a polyphemus moth also. And here you go. Here is the caterpillar of that. You can tell even without scale that it is huge, big, chunky caterpillar. They're usually really big because they're big moths. But also you can kind of see it has a really distinctive look to it with just a few of these little hairs coming out. So that's sort of what the Ceanothus silk moth looks like. Also, they've sort of got some of these kind of bumps. And then we've also got that western sheep moth, and those caterpillars can be a little irritating too, I think. So careful on that. Okay, and the last one I'm going to bring up is the sphingids. Someone had a question about hornworms earlier, and this is where that comes from. So the sphingids are the sphinx moths or hawk moths, and they look like little mini stealth aircraft. So they're really, really excellent flyers. They're adapted for flight. Their wings are adapted for that quick flight and that quiet flight. So you get that shape that's really, really good for flight. And you might think you're looking at a hummingbird for some of them, like this guy. This is white-lined sphinx, Hylas lineata, and they hover like butterflies when they're getting some nectar at flowers. So they're super impressive, very cool. Next time you think you might see a hummingbird at one of your plants, take a closer look, and you might see that some of them are moths. And some of these are really large too. And the scale is not scale is kind of hard with these pictures, but this poplar sphinx is huge. The western eyed sphinx is really big. These guys are pretty big too. So it depends. They're usually medium to large sized moths. And the caterpillars often have a horn on that rear segment. So talking about those tomato hornworms, this is, oh, if I can get it to move. There we go. So this is a caterpillar, and full disclosure, not of a species that is here in Washington, but it's a really easy way to kind of see some of the features you'd see on those ones. So this is the caterpillar of a sphinx moth, and they all kind of look generally the same. Most of them are going to have that kind of triangular head. They're going to be kind of, some of them are that greenish color with the little stripes, and they have most of them have horns here. So a tomato hornworm is I believe it's a 5-spotted hawk moth. And I don't think we have those ones here, but I'll check in on that and I can get back to you. But they all do look really similar, and they are voracious eaters because they have to be. They're pretty big. And you can see here a comparison of what I'm talking about when I say they look like little stealth aircraft. That those wings are adapted and their bodies are adapted to be a shape that is perfected for flight. So you can kind of see the comparison here. And those are kind of the main families and some main information about moths. But if you're interested in learning more about them, Moths of Western North America by Powell and Oppler is a really good resource. It's a big textbook type book that you can kind of see all of the really nice spread moths in there. There's also Pacific Northwest Moths, the website that has been running for a very long time. It has lots of moth resources and information on there. You've also got the Lepidoptera course from Cal Academy at the Southwestern Research Station. And that is an excellent 10-ish day course. It's always in August and it's fantastic. So if you're interested in moths, I would highly recommend that. And if you have any questions about any of these things, feel free to shoot me an email. I love to talk moths with people. So I'm thrilled to do that. And then there are 2 extra ones that I don't have a source for here. And that's going to be David Wagner is coming out with a book pretty soon, hopefully soon, on Western caterpillars of Western North America. He's got an Eastern one that has some species that we have here that are really, really good. Has some super solid information in there. So if you're waiting on that one, I would pick up the Eastern one and just take a look. And also David Droppers is coming out probably pretty soon with a Moths of Washington book. So that should be great too. So lots of great resources, lots of good stuff. And that kind of concludes my little portion of the presentation. So I'll go ahead and pass it on off.
Great. Thank you, Christie.
I'm just handing the remote control over to you, Melinda. 1 moment. There you are.
Great.
Oh, wait, let me mute myself before.
Oh.
Sorry.
All right. You can all hear me? Great. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Melinda Vickers. I am the Assistant Invertebrate Species Lead out of the Wildlife Program, which means I get to work statewide with a variety of different invertebrates of greatest conservation need that I'll explain what that means in a second. There we go. If I can change the slide. There we go. Okay. So just a little bit of context. Washington State is home to a huge diversity of invertebrates. They're definitely our most diverse group of species. We have, that we know of, more than 20,000 species, and that is just a guess because we are still learning new species all the time and discovering species for the first time in Washington. So it's a really exciting field to work in. And that includes everything from like all of our aquatic animals, our mussels and our snails and our butterflies and bees and dragonflies. And I like to tell people if they think that we've learned everything there is to learn in science, they need to talk to an invertebrate expert because we have a long way to go. And so from there, my work focuses on our species of greatest conservation need, which in Washington, we have 95 invertebrates on that list. And these kind of fall into two different buckets. The first ones are the ones that get legal protection. Those are our endangered species and our threatened species, which can be protected on a state level or a federal level. These have gone through a rigorous review process, and it's been determined that these are species that are essentially in the emergency room, that if we don't, we've determined that if we don't intervene, they might go extinct. And so none of our moths are on the endangered species list, but they are in the second bucket, which are the ones that are included in our state wildlife action plan. And so every 10 years, we go through a process where we review species in Washington state, and we work with scientists and regional experts, and we come up with a list of species backed by data that are not doing well. And from that list, we prioritize our time and our resources to try to protect these. And there are four species in Washington, four moths in Washington that are SGCN, species of greatest conservation need. And I'm going to go through and talk about each of them. And they're all happen to be part of that noctuid group that Christie covered earlier. And they're all part of the Copablepharon genus, which are all really interesting moths because they all live in dunes, which we don't have a lot of dunes in Washington state. So you can maybe see why they're not doing well. It's a pretty unique, restricted ecosystem. Something that's also really unique about all four of these species is they have sand burrowing larvae. So their larvae burrows in the sand. We have our very own sandworms here in Washington. And you can imagine why they would want to burrow in the sand. If any of you have been out on a sand dune or on a beach on a hot sunny day, it gets really, really hot on the surface. So the caterpillars burrow underground during the day to get away from that heat. And so I'm going to go through a little bit more about each of the species. The first one is the Columbia Basin dune moth. This one lives in open dunes, and in fact, it actually has only been found in one dune system, which is the Moses Lake Dune Complex. You can see on the map here. And as you can see from this selfie, it's a big ATV destination. A lot of people like to go out there to recreate, a lot of big fun dunes. And we've looked for it in other places, but it's really only been found in this one spot. And these are early season moths, so they fly in early June. And we don't know a whole lot about them. We don't know what they eat. It's hypothesized that they eat lemon scurf pea, which you can see in the picture here. It's our best guess based on what similar species eat and what is available in the area, but still a lot to learn. And you can see they're these kind of tan, brown, very fuzzy moths. They're about like 30 millimeters wingspan or so. Our second moth is another Eastern Washington moth. This is the variable dune moth. This one lives in the Columbia Basin on those low elevation sand dunes. So if you've ever driven up the Columbia River, you might have seen little small areas of sand, small dunes adjacent to the Columbia River, and that's the habitat that they live in. And so these ones live kind of in south central Washington. And we also don't really know what they eat either, but it's probably this plant you can see here called goosefoot. And these guys come out late in the summer, so you would see them flying in late August, early September. And yeah, these ones are also very fuzzy, and they're brown and white and kind of a similar size to the last one. Our third one, this is the hopfingers dune moth, also a Columbia Basin moth. This one lives at low elevation sandy areas. Like this one, this photo is not taken at a site where they live, but it is similar to where they've been found. They are a little bit further north than the variable dune moth, but also on the Columbia. These ones we know feed on brassicas, but they might eat other things as well. They've been found feeding on brassicas at night as larvae. And these are another early season one, so they're found flying in June. And these ones are this very striking white moth with these fuzzy margins. Okay, and the final one, this is the sand verbena moth, which is our only Western Washington species of greatest conservation need moth. They live on open sandy beaches. They're found kind of on the margins of the Salish Sea in that rain shadow area, one of the drier parts of the North Olympic coast and the San Juan Islands. And these ones are really unique because they are very specialized. They only eat one plant their entire life. So as larvae, they feed on the leaves of sand verbena. And then as adults, they will drink the nectar and they become pollinators of sand verbena. And these ones are found early May through June, sometimes into July. And since they are really specialized, they're only found where sand verbena is found, those sandy spots. And you can see they fly kind of around dusk, which is why we have this nice video while it's still light out. Okay, so why do we have threatened moths? This is the less fun part of the presentation, but there's a lot of moths that aren't doing well, and it's more than just those 4 that are on the list. And one of the big reasons is a loss of habitat. We've really moved into a lot of places that moths like to live. There's been a lot of development. We've developed a lot of the Washington coastline, taking over the beach. We've encroached on these sand dunes through cities and farming and mining and so on. And so they just don't have a lot of places left to live. And then on top of that, there's the issue with invasive species that are encroaching on their remaining habitat. For our SGCN moths in particular, grasses are a really big problem. So in Eastern Washington, cheatgrass is a huge problem, and in Western Washington, beach grass on the coast is a big problem. And one of the issues with grasses in dune systems especially is dunes are meant to constantly shift and rebuild and move over time, and grasses like to stop that. They stabilize the dunes, and the processes that keep the dune systems going stop. So that's an issue, as well as the use of pesticides. So like Christie mentioned, we have a lot of invasive problem moths. And so unfortunately, when people are spraying for these problematic moths and other insects that cause crop damage, pesticides are not so targeted that they can only kill the species that are targeted. They also have a lot of non-target effects. They end up being lethal to a lot of our native moth species. And so widespread spraying around cities and neighborhoods and on farmland is all a big threat to our moths. In addition to other pesticides such as herbicides and other things that are sprayed that might not be lethal, but can be problematic for moths as well, because they are herbivores and nectivores. Another issue specific to the dune systems as well is recreation. We really like to drive on the beach in Washington and all around the dunes. And while we're doing that, you can end up crushing a lot of plants and moth larvae in the process. And then you can't really talk about endangered species or threatened or any species needing conservation without mentioning climate change. We don't know exactly how climate change is going to impact all of these species, but it's supposed to get drier and warmer in Washington state, and that's going to make things harder for the moths that are already stressed out. So that's a lot. There's a lot of things going on. We have a really mammoth task ahead of us to try to protect these moths and all of our pollinators and other insects that we rely on and our ecosystems rely on. And so at DFW, there's a few things that we are working on. So everything we do, we want to be grounded in science. So we are putting a lot of work into research and monitoring. So like you saw, we're still learning about these species. So we're trying to understand like where they are and what they eat and how their ecosystems work and what works to protect them and what works to protect their habitats. And we're also supporting other outside partners to do the same. And then at the same time, using that information on our wildlife areas, we work on creating and protecting high quality habitat. So for moths, a lot of that involves planting or supporting the species that the moths rely on, their host plants that they eat, and plants that are vital to maintaining their habitat as well. And then we also work really closely with a lot of outside partners. Our wildlife areas are only a small portion of the state, so we rely on a lot of work partnering with other levels of government and nonprofits and private individuals as well to create habitat and just support best management practices, reduce harm to moths in areas not managed by DFW. And so that segues really well into I think something that's great about pollinator work and moths too is that people really can contribute meaningfully to helping pollinators. And one way to plug, the really easiest way to help us out is to tell us about it. So if you set up a moth sheet, if you see a really cool caterpillar, take a picture of it, take a few pictures from a few angles and upload it to iNaturalist, share it with people. If you see a cool bee, a cool butterfly, that really helps us. It can give us information about where the moths are. Maybe you'll help us figure out where they live or what they eat or new information about their lives. So please do that. And then there's a lot more you can do, and that's what Claire is going to tell us about.
Okay, Claire, you should have control of the screen.
Sorry, it took me a moment to turn my audio on. I understand now. Okay, so creating and maintaining habitat for moths. Hold on, y'all. I'm so sorry. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Is that zoomed in for everyone? Cool. Great. Okay, awesome. I can see this now. Okay, so creating and maintaining habitat for moths. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so real quick, just want to talk about the moth life cycle. So starting with eggs and then going to the larva, which is the caterpillar. And then the caterpillar forms a pupa, which is the cocoon. And then metamorphosis happens and a moth comes out, and then they lay eggs again. So that is relevant to the rest of this conversation. So I thought I would start with that. Okay, so moths in an ecosystem. The main creatures or parts of the moths that are eaten, the main stages of moths that are eaten is the caterpillar and the moth itself. So caterpillars are often eaten by birds, other insects, and rodents. And then moths their main predators are bats, birds, and spiders. So if we're looking at a food web and thinking about why it's important to build habitat, so let's say we have 2 plants in this really sad ecosystem. And then these plants are consumed by the caterpillars in particular, the flowers by the moths. And then the caterpillars and the moths are consumed by birds. The plants are consumed by squirrels. And then foxes and eagles consume those. Now, what happens if we take out one of these plants and make it an even sadder ecosystem? There may be no moths happening there. And what that means is there's a lot of competition for these resources. So there would be less birds, less ground squirrels, and then it's possible that even one of these top predators would be taken away or would have to leave the ecosystem. But if we add a few more plants to make it a slightly less sad ecosystem with 4 plants, all of a sudden there's a lot more resources to go around. And we've got a whole ecosystem again. So that's all thinking about food and how the moths impact the ecosystem. In order to create habitat, just generally, we need food, water, shelter, and space. And so we're going to look at how we can create habitat for moths through food, water, shelter, and space. Okay, bringing it back to the moth life cycle, it's important to remember that particularly food, shelter, and space for each moth may be unique. As Christie was talking about, there are generalist moths, and then there are, oh my gosh, Christie, I can't remember the word, moths that have particular plants that they form relationships with.
Specialists.
Specialists, thank you. Okay, so let's look at food. Mushrooms are eaten by caterpillars. And then for moths, their main food, well, okay, so Christie was talking about how not all moths actually eat food at all, or like consume nectar at all. So we're going to talk particularly about the ones that do create habitat for them through the flowers. And the flowers, them getting nectar from the flowers leads to pollination. So that's just another way that they impact the whole ecosystem. Okay, so when we're talking about putting plants in our moth ecosystem, we are going to talk about 3 different kinds. So there are native plants. They have been around since time immemorial. Examples of these are fireweed, Douglas fir, and mock orange. Non-native plants, and these were brought to the U.S. since Western colonization and may or may not have negative impacts on the ecosystem. So some of those here are chamomile, blueberry, and apple. And then invasive plants were brought here since Western colonization and have a very negative impact on an ecosystem. So there's English ivy is an example, Himalayan blackberry, and butterfly bush are all invasive species that will take over habitats. And, you know, like, yes, we see that there's berries here. Yes, we see that the English ivy have shelter. And yes, we see that the butterfly bush has these flowers. Butterfly bush, the leaves and stems and such are not great for moths and for caterpillars and the eggs, nor are they a good source of nectar. Himalayan blackberry will take over, and so it's that kind of thing where there's only that one plant left. And then English ivy will do the same, as will butterfly bush. Okay, so thinking about native plants and non-native plants are the ones that we're gonna want to plant. Native plants, we prefer them to be prioritized though. So here's an example of a study where there's landscaping. I think this is in Boston. There's landscaping with non-native plants, and there's some biodiversity there. There's some pollinators, some caterpillars, some birds. But then with landscaping with solely native plants, there was a 50% higher abundance of native birds, 9 times higher abundance of rare birds. And this is within a city. 3 times more butterflies, 2 times higher abundance of native bees. And if we're particularly looking at the caterpillars, these are the native plants. This is like one of the things that increased probably the most here, and were then consumed by all of these ecosystems. So caterpillars, or sorry, all of these creatures. Moth caterpillars, well, I guess, so moths oftentimes will lay their eggs on a few different kinds of plants. They are most adapted to native plants, though. And then caterpillars are further adapted to native plants. And what that means is that the moths will be most successful in native plant areas. So thinking about plant selection, we're looking at flowers, which if there's plants with flowers, there are leaves, fruits, seeds, woody plants, and nectar. So let's just like look at flowers for how we're going to choose plants for our moth garden. So moths just generally prefer flowers that are dull red, purple, pink, white. Yellow is another one. This is just general. So some moths may prefer different things. Flower shape is super important. So moths will go towards regular, tubular, and no lips. So that like tubular flower. And then flower scent, strongly sweet. So let's look at an example here. So pink yarrow is a non-native plant, and then white yarrow, which you can see behind it, is a native. But let's say this is in our garden. And in the center of these, surprisingly, there's actually tubular flowers. The reason that we want tubular flowers for moths is because they have the proboscis, and that is like not a tongue, but similar to a tongue. And it will come out and go into these tubular areas, get that nectar, and bring it on out back to their mouths. So these have that tubular structure. They are pink and they smell pretty sweet. So an example of what flowers we could put in the garden. Okay, so let's move on to water. We're going to get back to plants in a moment, but we're going to go to water real quick. So moths and caterpillars get most of their water from plants, and I'm going to kind of bust through these. Unfortunately, we don't have a huge amount of time left. We'll probably go a little bit over, but they get most of their water from plants. So what's really important is for us to protect the water that feeds plants. So that's pre-filtering water, that's washing vehicles at car washes or on gravel. That's another way that the gross stuff that's on cars and the soap and stuff is filtered into the ground. We need to dispose of chemicals properly and then reduce pesticide use, which Melinda definitely mentioned and will mention again later. So for shelter for moths, there's a few things that we're going to look at. The shelter is important for all stages of moth life. With plants, you want to kind of do short to tall plants, so vary those heights, and even trees. Leave stems and cuttings when you are taking care of your garden. Limit mowing in the spring, because that's a time when there's more eggs around, and even, well, summer is more the cocoons. So be mindful though, especially with those eggs. And in the soil, definitely light disruption during the spring. I don't know if folks have dug in their gardens before and noticed these pupa, but they are around. And so just like make sure you're being gentle with your soil as you're or working with the soil. And then piles. So leaf piles and debris piles, which is like sticks, are great shelter for caterpillars, for some of their cocoons, and then also for moths. So different moths prefer different plants, as we talked about, and definitely different heights throughout their life cycles. So when we're thinking about building a moth garden or habitat, there's a few different like areas that we're thinking. So we're thinking about ground cover, small to medium shrubs, and then larger shrubs and mid-story canopy. So I wanted to bring in here that to build habitat, you don't necessarily have to have a large space or have to be able to plant trees. You can have a smaller space. You can have even non-native trees, like there's an apple tree in there, but they're short trees, right? So it can be any size you want. I haven't put this in the chat, but there is a resource that we have on if you work or if you have a landlord or neighbors or live in an HOA, and how you can actually like work with your neighbors and your HOA to accept your habitat. So I'll put that in the chat later on. Okay, so let's do an example of a moth garden, plants you might put in. So we need to think about ground covers, right? So spreading phlox is one. Forbs are those shorter flowering plants. So we're looking at things like evening primrose, yarrow, and goldenrod. Shrubs, and so these are kind of shorter and taller ones. Red flowering currant, Nootka rose are some shorter ones. Mock orange is kind of in the middle there, and then Saskatoon can get pretty big. And then tree, Douglas fir is a great one, especially for our woolly bear caterpillar. Okay, so thinking about space now. I'm gonna think on a landscape scale, gonna give an example of this. So what we're thinking about is how one small habitat adds to a larger habitat. You can see here that this large space that may have been home to many creatures and moths has over the years become more and more developed. So we'll look at this bottom one in particular, the most recent. Let's say we have these two spaces that are parks. They're decent habitat for moths, not perfect, but they're pretty good. And then, but they're really far apart. And so moths can't necessarily, they don't travel between them very well. Caterpillars are not gonna be able to travel between them. But then we can add these like community space habitats, and there's a little bit more habitat in there. And then yard habitats, and we'll get to what this means with the Habitat at Home program. But suddenly here, there's a lot more habitat. And then there's small space habitats, which can be like a few containers or a small plot. And suddenly we have a lot more habitat for moths in here. Okay, I'm going to go over one sustainable action, which is reduce pesticide use, what Melinda was talking about. This is the #2 action item that you can take to support moths under building habitat. So we're talking about pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, pesticides being like more of the larger pests. They are extremely toxic, and they can be just like bought at the store by you. They enter plants that caterpillars eat and poison them. So that's a big way that they do that. They also impact moth habitat and reduce it.
Claire, just so you know, we're at 8:02, so I'm so sorry. We'll want to try to wrap it up a little bit.
Sounds
quickly.
good. I think there's just a little bit left, so that's perfect.
Awesome. Thank you, Claire.
Yeah. Okay, so ways to reduce pesticide use: preventative pest control, building healthy soils, planting native plants. So they're going to be more adapted to the pests that are here already. And then thinking about right plant, right place. So if you're planting a plant that likes dry ecosystem, you put it in a wetter area, that plant is not going to be happy. It may attract pests, and it may not be particularly resilient to them. Okay, natural pest control. Think about how tolerant you are of pests. Like, okay, if you're thinking about herbicides, is it okay that you have some dandelions? Maybe, maybe not. It's okay with me. personally. And dandelions can be decent food for moths and butterflies. Not the best, but they happen. So how tolerant are you of these insects, these plants, and the fungus that's in here? And then if you are not tolerant, you need to act. So monitor for pests and act quickly. And then things that you can do for plants, you can trim, move, or replace them. Remove or replace them. And then with non-toxic pest control, look for the OMRI label. There are some ones that are non-toxic / less toxic to the environment. Okay, and then the last thing I'll talk about is certify your moth habitat. So the program I run is Habitat at Home. It's about supporting people building wildlife habitat where they live, work, and play. And so this can be a small space habitat, a yard, or a community space habitat. Small space can be like you live in an apartment, you need a container garden, fantastic. Yard is larger, can be as large or as small. And then community space is these areas that are shared by people. So you can apply online. You need to send us a few pictures and give us some details for your habitat. And then we send you a sign. These are what the signs look like. And some information in a packet. And we are able to then also, the other thing that's fantastic about this program that's really helpful for us is that if you give us your information, we're able to map your habitat, and that information won't be shared with anyone else, but it will be helpful for WDFW to understand where there's quality habitat. So that we'll be able to work with the wildlife there. Okay, on to questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire, Melinda, and Christie. I definitely learned a lot about moths. So I think we may have a few questions in the chat. So I'm actually going to stop sharing so that people can see your beautiful faces. And everybody, we do know that it is past time. So if you need to head out, you can, but our wonderful panelists have agreed to stay on for a few minutes to answer questions. I'd also ask that if you would like to receive that email with links as well as potentially the recording, please put your email in the chat so that us panelists can see, just to make sure that we're getting the email to the people who want the email. So please put your email in the chat if you would like to receive that email. Well, let's take a look at what questions we're getting. Okay. Looks like we have quite a few that have already been answered in the chat, which is great.
I saw this one on lights, and I wanted to speak to that one. So it's about bright lights at night being harmful to moths, especially like commercial buildings, street lights, residential outside lights. So as Christie said in this, they are harmful, or they can be harmful, confusing them attracting moths and like the moths then take more energy to go towards those lights rather than using their energy to go get food or to lay eggs or something. Christie can talk more about moth feeding, and maybe Melinda can talk more about the lights too. The things that that we often promote is lights that are less bright, so have more of a like yellow tint to them, and then lights that are motion censored or on a timer. Now, what is important though is that you think about the other reasons that lights might be beneficial. So lights can be beneficial if you're wanting to deter predators, depending on where you live. So just think about like the pros and the cons there, which is a difficult call to make. Melinda and Christie, do either of you have any additions to that?
Really, I think you covered it all, but I mean, in urban areas, I think there's often people have more lights on than they really need. And so it's helpful to just think about like, do you want to maybe save a little electricity and have a little bit more darkness and just turn off one of your outside lights?
Yeah, and I think for moth sheets, that's a really good question with the lights, because I was talking about those super bright lights that have those different more wavelengths for moths so that they're really attracted to them. I think that it should be fine and not too detrimental if it's every once in a while, or if you're limiting the amount of time, because there's such a benefit to getting that information of what species you have around you in abundance also, that I think it kind of evens out and actually probably ends up being much more of a scientific benefit. So I would just kind of just keep it in mind and be careful when you're moth sheeting, and just be conscious of those things. But yeah, that's a great question.
Okay, let's see. Um, Panelists, do you want to take a look in the Q&A and see if there's any others you'd like to address out loud? There's just so many great questions, and I see you already put some answers in there. Just want to make sure you have the opportunity to elaborate if you would like.
There was one on iNaturalist, a question about if it's a good place to get IDs. I don't use iNaturalist very much, so I'll point towards someone else for that.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of iNaturalist questions, and one of them is like, if I see an unusual caterpillar, should we report the? But you just need to make sure that you're getting clear photos. So if you upload, like, I think there's a lot of times people see a really cool moth and they have a really blurry picture, and you're not going to get a good ID from that. So if you have pictures from a couple different angles and it's clear enough, then it can be a good ID resource. But there's just that one caveat, because there's a lot of entomologists who are very active on iNaturalist. So if you get good photos and put them up there, they might be on there helping you ID it pretty quick, if it's a good photo.
Yeah, that's great, Melinda, and I totally agree. I would add to be careful with locations and things, especially for sensitive species. It's hard because some of the time it will obscure it for you. Sometimes it won't. So just be careful about it. But I would definitely put some sort of location, maybe like a county or something like that, if you're concerned about, people going and messing with something. You would hope people wouldn't, but it's more people kind of walking around an area or whatever. But I would at least get a county in there so that people can help you ID it, because sometimes that makes a really big difference. And so it's kind of a trade-off there with that. But if you are posting a tiger moth from Washington State, you will probably see me at some point. So I hope to see you there.
Thank you all. Let's see. Looks like there's a follow-up question on lights. Do you know of ways to encourage or persuade commercial buildings to dim lights at night? I live in a university town with some big overly lit up buildings. ...
That's a really good question. I don't necessarily have a great answer for that, but I know that different communities have dark sky initiatives, or there's something called Bee Campus. USA, which is not about moths, but you can incorporate other pollinator-friendly practices. You can work with, like, I think it's through the Xerces Society. I would look into, can get a link to that, but yeah. Bee Campus, Bee City, Dark Sky initiatives would all be a good place to start to encourage people to do that. And Claire, you might have more ideas. I don't know.
That's exactly what I was thinking, Melinda.
Awesome. Okay.
Can I?
Well,
Oh, sorry.
for
Can I super briefly add to that?
for
That
it.
might be something to look into with your own jurisdiction too, because sometimes ordinances are passed um, with that type of lighting stuff in there. So that might be something to look at just to see if your specific jurisdiction has something like that, or if they would be interested in putting something out there like that. Because stuff keeps changing and they update their ordinances, and it's moving to a place for the better with all of that input, and so that can be a really really good thing to do too.
Awesome. Thank you, Christie. Panelists, are there any other questions you want to elaborate on? Really appreciate how active you were in answering them in the Q&A box.
There's this one about folks, Fish and Wildlife, keeping tabs on new moth species or invasive moth species. So invasive moth species and invasive species in general are handled by Washington Department of Agriculture. I think their focus for moths is the spongy moth. And so the moths that they are focusing on are primarily the ones that are impacting agriculture. And then Melinda or Christie, about Fish and Wildlife and new species?
Yeah, we don't really keep tabs on new species. We leave that to our partners at various universities that are really paying closer attention to that. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, lots of great info about moths. So I'll give my little summary. Moths are cool. There's lots you can do to help moths, including reporting them on iNaturalist and planting native plants that are attractive to moths. We have a ton of great resources that our panelists put in the chats for you to learn more about moths and what you can do. And as always, I like to say, like, whenever I'm viewing wildlife or doing anything for wildlife, I always just try to think about what's best for them. So whether it comes to moss shading or to planting my garden, I just always try to think about what's best for them. What are the actions that I can take to help wildlife? And I can tell from the questions in the chat that there are quite a few people who also really care about what is best for wildlife. So, I think we'll wrap things up, and I will collect these emails and get you a email with all the links in the next week or so. So thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you taking the time.
All right, thanks everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I'm just going to stay on to pull these emails. And also, I will stop the recording.